And the Cuba embargo begs. Biden begs Mexico to stop the migrant flow, but there's a price to pay. Dude, a lot of people have been talking about this whole situation, and still to this day, it's kind of sad. Even leftists aren't getting this one right, too, as well. Look, you can do what you have to do at the border. You can seal it down. You can lock it down. I remember when I went to put me on big screen real quick because I want to talk about this really quickly. So I want fam to come in for this one. So you can do what you want to try to do. You can try to. People think that if you seal the border, right? Because they also talk about this. Oh, it's an open border situation, right? You could do what you want to do as far as at the border. And fam's been down to the border before. Remember, you made that trip with Johnny at the border and some friends from the Bernie Sanders campaign back in the days. I mean, we've gone deep into Latin America. But you can do what you want to do. Fam, I want to talk about this in general real quick before we get to the whole situation where Biden is asking AMLO to please stop the flow of migrants that are coming across. And, AMLO gave him a proposition. But before we talk about that, I think we should need to talk about this as a whole, because this is still a situation when you look at Republican mainstream media, conservative mainstream media, and there's a lot of it on, and even leftist mainstream media too as well. They're talking about the crisis at the border, crisis at the border, crisis at the border. You don't fix the crisis at the border, right? You have to talk about why there's so much flow of migration coming on up. After our last trip to Nicaragua and sitting down, just having breakfast with Camila Escalante from Casachua News, we were talking about the whole situation, and she used type of language that I have to continue to use. I'm like, you know what? I never said that. I would just talk about the bases. I said, you can't close the border until you close the bases, but she said it clearly. Well, people don't realize that there's still an occupation going on. We are occupying these countries. We are telling them what to do. Angelica Duenas, who's running for Congress as a Democrat, even though she's not a Democrat in California, pointed out to me the other day that along the trail where they're coming all the way up from Latin America, from South America, and she's showing the trails through Central America up into the border or South border, there are bases along these trails, right? Wouldn't it be awesome if we were able to change our foreign policy, stop occupying these lands, leave the bases, and use those bases, these big bases, as housing for some of the migrants that have nowhere to go? And the reason why they have no way to go is because what America does constantly, what the West does constantly. They go and they occupy these territories. We have these bases there with troops all over the place. Mainly, the main area that's concentrated where we have these are in the triangle. What do you call it? It's the southern triangle, the northern triangle, I believe it's called. It's in Central America. And it's in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, right? Those are the main three areas where a lot of the migrants are still coming from. They're also coming from Venezuela now too as well, where we have heavy sanctions and we're suffocating them and they're still trying to make it their way. But it's all about three things, guys. Resource extraction. We want those resources over there. If we can turn that country to chaos, the Congo, you might hear about this, the way they're using child labor to go down for cobalt, nickel, all these other things. Well, we get them for pennies on the dollar. Niger just threw the French out. And one of the big things they were talking about in Niger is that they were extracting their lithium for pennies on the dollar. And the Niger government, the coup that took over at the behest of the people, that they have the support of the people, said, no more. We're not going to let you steal our resources for pennies on the dollar. Same thing that happens in Latin America. When you know that UN vote, fam, that came through about supporting Israel, there were very few countries who supported Israel. One of the South American countries that supported Israel was not South America, Central America, was Guatemala. Why? Because it's a client state. The U.S. State Department worked with the Guatemalans over there to make sure that the indigenous candidates couldn't get on the ballot. And even RFK has talked about the fact that Guatemala has never been able to recover from what we have done to them. Was it Arbanez, I believe his name is? I want to say it right. They had a revolution in their country. Well, the American government went back in there, removed them, because it was the United Fruit Company, the UFC at the time, which is now Dole and Chiquita, because we wanted to extract and take their bananas. So it's all about resource extraction and then the monetary system, right? Keeping the country in chaos so we can also thrust our monetary system in there. You can use the American dollar down there because why? We take over the country. We put in our friendly dictator. Then we make sure that they take huge IMF loans that they cannot pay back. And then in return, we take their resources. So we keep the country in chaos. And the third part is we want the cheap labor, not we, but the ruling class wants the cheap labor to take advantage of in our country. And that's why when they're coming in, who exploits these migrants more? Is it the cartels, which everybody's fixated on? Oh my God, the cartels, close the borders. My God, the cartels. Or the corporations and the ruling class. Who exploits these people more? By far, we know it's the corporations and the ruling class. So you cannot fix that problem at the border. You have to go down and change your behavior and what's going on in Latin America. We have to close the bases before we close the border. You close the border. Somebody said this at a rally I went to. It's like they're escaping a fire. It's hell in their country because what we're implementing on them. And we're seriously still doing it. If you go down to Latin America, you'll see this for yourself. You got so many people who are making opinions about open borders and stuff. Go down to Latin America and see for yourself. Go down to Latin America. We have bases. We control their land. The Monroe Doctrine is alive and well. And until we change that, fam, nothing will change. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you can go ahead and talk about, the Biden-Cuban thing, but I just really, because I do have a lot to say on this, because this also ties into Ecuador. And I think I'm very, very sick and tired of hearing people talk about open borders, very sick and tired of hearing people talk about the immigration issue as if it's exactly the same as Europe. It isn't. This is a completely different. Europe is so small. We have a completely different border situation. We don't have open borders. We don't have illegals voting in any way, shape, or form. We've talked about this ad nauseum. Is it a problem, the migration issue? Yeah, but what is happening is they're trying to turn the poors against the poors. They're trying to turn the people in the United States who are scared because they obviously see a decline happening. And I told this to Pasta and to everybody that can listen. There is an energy that's just so negative in the United States. Everybody knows what's happening. Everybody knows things are falling apart. They just aren't admitting it to themselves. You go there, businesses are closing, people are getting laid off, malls are empty. I took like a video of a mall, and it's just night and day compared to what it is here in Moscow. And not just like in central Moscow, but like Moscow Oblast, like the outer parts of Moscow. People are just not in a good spot in the United States. So then you have the influx of immigrants coming in, and then you have people getting scared that these people are going to replace them. Now, this has gone and touched so many different areas that I think some people aren't comfortable talking about, but there is an element of that replacement theory, right? That white people think they're going to be replaced by XYZ, whatever the boogeyman may be of the time. That's not really happening. No, it's not about people replacing people. It is about being manipulated against other people who are literally the victims of what our foreign policy is doing, as Pasta mentioned, and turning against them versus turning against who's doing it. And if you fall trapped to this, and you can see so many people are falling trapped to this, including people on the left. So I do have to say something. So I'll let you start on what you were going to talk about first, because I am really, really angry when I'm seeing people on the left buy into this sort of thing. And I see it also here in Russia as well. So I do have a lot to say about that.
Well, let me ask you a question, fam. If, in fact, we hunker down at the border, let's say, for argument's sake, we're too loose at the border. Let's say it's not an open border, okay? Let's just say it's a loose border. If we were to hunker down and close it down, is that really going to stop the problem? Is that really? I mean, these people are escaping a firing, burning building, and a lot of people, from what I understand, they fly here and then just never go back. That's the way the majority of the people come here anyways. And here's something else that's going on, too, as well. And, I was talking about that with a friend of the show. And there's this argument now that it's just not Latin America because they're coming in from everywhere. But if you look at the border numbers, according to their numbers, the Border Patrol, right, 80% of the people are still coming from Latin America. That's where the majority of the people are still coming from, and we still control a lot of what's going on. We didn't get to go down to Guatemala for their election, but we knew for quite some time that the State Department was working with a lot of people, aristocrats or oligarchs in Guatemala, to make sure certain candidates don't get on the ballot, to make sure that they had their own candidate there, because Guatemala is so important to the fruit cartel, right? We have all their resources. We're taking them. We're making money off them, not we, oligarchs, corporations, and we're stripping them down so hard. So what's going to happen? Of course, if you take away their money and we see someone just all over the world. Gaddafi said, you remove me from power and chaos starts here. The flow of migration into your countries Europe are going to be crazy. And he was right. We in the West, the leaders of the West, are the ones that we as Americans need to be pointing to our leaders for what's going on down south. Nobody ever points to it. You have so much time and effort and energy, and now leftists are even repeating shit about the border. And they think it's just because they were given an invitation. Hey, come down here. We'll give you all these things. That's another thing. Oh, they're giving phones. They're giving money. They're giving bus tickets. They're giving healthcare. And there's a lot of information coming out now saying that, a lot of the services, like the food stamps and the what's it called, Wix and all these other things, they're being mopped up by illegal immigrants. Well, how many illegal immigrants also put into the system and never take back? They're not illegal immigrants, first of all. They're undocumented workers would be a proper term. But once again, I don't want to get caught up in the whole that argument, whatever you want to call them. How many people they're putting into Social Security because they're using a false identity or a fake name or whatever, putting all that money into Social Security and never will take a dime from it too as well, right? So, there's so many discussions that are not being had when it comes to the flow of migration to this country, but a lot of people have to understand it is our foreign policy which drives this stuff. And You're not going to change anything at the border until you change our foreign policy. Let's bring up the article about the end the embargo really quickly, because I know, fam, we're going to get into a lot of this stuff. We'll be here forever. End the embargo. Biden begs Mexico to stop migrant flows, but there's a price. And it says, as Joe Biden continues to pull in the toilet, in no small part to the border crisis he created. He didn't create it. He did not create it. This has been going on for so long.
Yeah.
Stop. The Monroe Doctrine has been around for a long time. We've been down there for a long time. Do you know that in Guatemala, I think we did some stories, maybe in El Salvador, I don't know what's going on. The IDF does training down there. There are Israeli bases that are down there. I did a story about this a long time ago. Why is the West all up in everybody's stuff down there? Leave. The number one thing that we see when we go down to Latin America that the people want on both sides of the aisle down there, national sovereignty. America, France, England, Israel, get out. And until you get out, this problem will not be solved. In late December, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, fam, I hate the fact that his name is too close to your name, who has repeatedly maintained that the border is secure, traveled to Mexico with Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's all over the place, to beg for assistance in what officials called preliminary discussions with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And there he is, but there's a price. On Friday, AMLO laid out his conditions. U.S. approval for a plan to deploy $20 billion to Latin American and Caribbean countries. He wants payback. He wants money from all the resources that they sold, for the resources they continue to steal. Suspend the U.S. blockade of Cuba, which is great because people understand in Latin America, some of the Latin American leaders understand what we are doing in Cuba to this day is awful. Does Cuba have to answer for some of the decisions they made? Fine. You can make that argument. They've made some decisions that I'm not even crazy about. But the majority of the reason of why they are suffering is because the West is strangling them. When we were in Cuba, me and fam couldn't access our bank accounts. We can't withdraw money. Okay? They label them, Donald Trump, China, right? Also Cuba, labeled them as a state sponsor of terrorism. Cuba, okay? Crippling them so hard, putting their people into so much pain and hopes that the people would overturn their government. That's what sanctions do. You make the conditions so hard. But the fact that you're willing to put the people of Cuba into a position where they're going to be suffering and starving just to attain a certain goal because you want a certain leader there is disgusting. Another thing the West needs to stop doing. Remove all sanctions from Venezuela. Look what AMLO's doing. He's looking at Cuba. He's looking at Venezuela, how they're being suffocated by the West and the world because the world goes along with it. We can't do business with you. Why can't we do business with you? Because if we do business with you, the United States is going to spank us, right? Grant at least 10 million Hispanics living in the U.S. the right to remain and work legally. AMLO looking out for Cuba because nobody else is. Nobody else is stepping up. And there's only so much they can do. So AMLO is using his power. He's like, you want something from me? Fine, I'll give it to you. But you got to give something in return. And he's being a humanitarian and looking out for Cuba, and he's looking out for Venezuela. I think this is great. Hey, and here's the thing. I think that AMLO can do what he's done from time to time before. Use some of the migrants that are coming in to help rebuild and reconstruct stuff in his country. They got a new train system that's going on, right? I mean, AMLO has been brilliant at this. We're going to talk to more people about this, about what AMLO has done, because a lot of people get it wrong. But this guy has done so much. These are all demands, but the southern border could also tank Biden's chance of re-election, as the border saw a record 300,000 migrants processed by CBP in December alone. One Biden official told the NBC News that AMLO was has a very ambitious agenda, and that for some of his requests, the U.S. Congress would need to act. Fam, I don't know about you, but AMLO, he's one of my faves. AMLO is bae. I don't know about you.
So this article is actually painting this as a negative thing, because again, we're talking about this fear mongering that's happening, and a lot of Americans are very much scared because of the circumstances that our government in the United States has done. Okay, it's our government, it's our officials, it is the intelligence apparatus, it is all of those things. It is not these people that we have displaced, because we have displaced them. And when we talk about Israel, it's funny how Israelis can, say, oh, we trace back our ancestry and our lineage to, Jerusalem. We were there. We were the chosen people. But when it comes to the Americas, because again, this is something that our friend Terry always points out, we're North America, we're the United States of America, but we're not America. There's a whole other continent, South America. There's also Central America, right? And so there's also the Caribbean. These are countries that existed. And so we've somehow, because of the Monroe Doctrine that Pasa mentioned, have decided to make these countries our backyard. Our leaders have. And in doing so, they've completely done an operation that's the same thing that we're seeing in Ecuador today, the consequences of that. And it's rinse and repeat, resource extraction, destabilization in order to get a puppet government, in order to resource extract. And of course, all of this money and this wealth goes to the West, particularly the United States and their allies. And the oligarchs, but also it did go once to sustain a way of life where we don't ever, as Americans of the United States, receive any sort of, sanctions, any sort of bombs. A normal Joe in the United States could never imagine living under sanctions in the United States. We have no concept of that. You have no concept of really what it would be like to have a bomb dropped on your home, to be shot at, to live in any sort of state where we're fearful. Yeah, people bring up 9/11, but again, who did 9/11? We go back to all of this, right? Like, this is nobody. There's this fear that, China's going to come after us, that the Arabs are going to come after us. Like, this is the rhetoric people use, and that the illegals are going to come in and they're going to take everything. You have to understand where this is coming from. This is coming from manipulation in order to get you to turn on your neighbor, whether it's the liberal or the Trump supporter or whoever, because liberals don't actually talk about the border issue with any sort of actual data, because their whole thing is just, oh, we just have open borders and open borders is great and blah, blah, blah. They don't really have a situation because, first of all, we don't have open borders. And it's not about not looking at compassionately, but it's also, you have to put statistics, you have to put data in, you have to talk about the cause. They just say we should just help people, we should just help people, but they don't really care, because at the end of the day, these liberal yuppie moms living in wherever, liberal state they're living, they don't really have anything to do with these people. They use them for work. These people that come in from Central America, a lot of them, and I know this because we lived in California and we worked in the restaurant industry. We've lived in an area where literally right by the border. So they come in, they do the jobs none of you want to do. They will, go and work in the fields. They'll go be dishwashers. They'll clean the streets. They'll do all of these jobs. And we're getting a lot of also influx from Africa now, from the migrants coming from Africa, yet another continent that the United States and Europe have both ravaged, which is why they're kicking the French out in Burkina Faso and Mali and in all of these other places. So when I see this tweet, if you can pull this one up, this is like a big account on Twitter. I don't know who they are. I don't follow them, but they're a big account on Twitter that people for some reason just, take what they say as like fact. Now, this account was shared by none other than Elon Musk, who said they're coming for your kids. They're putting illegals in school. And so Elon Musk retweeted this. And you have to understand, if Elon Musk is pushing something, that there's an agenda behind it. The man has worked closely with the defense industry, with Israeli intelligence. The dude suspended a bunch of people the other day on a whim or whatever. And then they brought them back, whatever the case may be. This man is not a free speech hero. He is not anybody that's actually there to fight for the common person. He is, he's not any of these things that his minions think he is. But so this tweet says, in 2007, Senator Joe Biden declared that. Yeah, fine.
Let me read it for you, because there is a conversation to be had over here, because I think there is some truth to the fact that, yes, a lot of the jobs that a lot of the immigrants do that are jobs that people don't want to do. But there are jobs that are now doing that. There are people out there who would do, right? And there is a reason to drive that labor down, and that's going to be the advantage of. So there is some truth to that, I do believe. Carpentry, construction work. But once again, who's taking advantage of that? It's not the cartels who are making all the money off that. It's the corporations who are also taking advantage of the situation too as well. So I do believe there is some truth to that.
They're paying people less.
Yeah.
They don't want to pay you more. Yeah, but it's
so let me read this real quick, and then we'll get into that. Absolutely. But once again, there are jobs that people don't want to do in the United States that a lot of immigrants do. They're not going out there picking fruit. They're not cutting lawns and doing pools and crap jobs in the restaurant that the migrants do. So there's truth on both sides. There's nuance in this whole situation. In 2007, Senator Joe Biden declared that no great nation has uncontrolled borders, warning that America must build a border fence and increase border agents to secure the nations against drugs, terror, and illegal immigration. Something that I think is exaggerated to this day by Donald Trump. We're going to have the crime's going to go crazy. Yeah, the crime's going to go crazy because a lot of Americans who don't have jobs now, right? Or Americans because we don't have a workforce, because let's also understand to the fact that a lot of jobs have been exported outside the country, right? We don't make anything. We don't fix anything. That has a lot to do with the crime situation too as well, not just illegal immigrants coming in. In fact, I think the fact that we exported a lot of our factory jobs and manufacturing is a bigger addition to the crime situation than any migrant coming in, because most of the migrants that are coming in, the majority of them, fam, we know them, we talk to them, we know who these people are. They're just workers and loving people who try to stay in the shadows, don't get in trouble. They send some of their money home, and they just want to be respected, and they don't want anything for free. That whole growing up about Mexicans being lazy, I don't know where they got that from, because they are some of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life. Biden accused wealthy Republicans of wanting to increase illegal immigration to replace American workers with cheaper labor. He's right there, but it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats. And also the first part about him, I want to build a big fence, way before Donald Trump even said those things, it was Joe Biden. The reason the employers want this extra influx is it drives cost down. Employers have to be held responsible for unscrupulous practice of bringing people here in order to keep wages down. That's not fair to Americans. You have to hold employers responsible for hiring Americans first. When you going to do it, Joe? When you going to do it? Criticizing President Bush, Biden lamented, the lack of border agents, the absence of a border fence, and the free flow of drugs into the country. Bullshit. What drugs are they bringing into the country from the southern border? But people think, oh, the fentanyl. Fentanyl could be made here, ladies and gentlemen, and most people are going to move their operations here. They don't need the cartels. And the cartels are run by who? The CIA. People can go over and under a fence, but can't take 100 kilos of cocaine over and under the fence. This is true. Fast forward to President Biden's term. A record-breaking 8 million people have illegally entered the country in 3 years, with the fentanyl crisis leading over 106,000 Americans overdosing on drugs last year. Well, who turned them into addicts, ladies and gentlemen? Was it the cartels? Was it the Mexican people bringing the...
This is
no,
what that
it
is
was
saying.
Big Pharma, you idiots.
Yeah.
On Biden's inaugural day, he introduced policies that incentivized illegal immigration. On Biden's inaugural day, come on, keep it. Come on, Jamie, you're making me dizzy over here. Pause deportation, suspended remain in Mexico, stop border wall construction. The consequences are dire. China, a national security crisis draining American taxpayers of hundreds of billions annually, leading major cities to slash budgets for essential services such as fire, police, sanitation, and education. As Senator Biden once warned, no great nation can be in a position where they can't control their borders. It matters to you. It matters how you control your borders, not just for immigration, but it matters for drugs, terror, and a whole range of other things. Fam,
so
go ahead.
We don't have to play the video because we've seen this video countless times. Okay, so first of all, the fentanyl crisis is a very American crisis. It's a self-made American crisis. You won't find that fentanyl crisis being anywhere as big as it is in the United States, literally. And it's affecting white working class Americans. It's affecting also, of course, Black Americans, but it's affecting everybody. But when we're talking about fentanyl, we're talking about the Midwest. We're talking about poor areas, working class areas. Or who got these people addicted to fentanyl?
Opioids. Yeah. Fam, your mic went out. Fam, your mic went out. Fam, your mic went out. Your mic's still out. You must have unplugged or something.
Can you hear me?
Go back. All right, so you started, you were
good?
saying who, yeah, you're good. You started with who got these people addicted to drugs?
Yeah, it was it was Big Pharma,
Big
but
Pharma.
it's not the American idea that these cartels are coming in and are like going to Joey and Sally and giving them fentanyl to get addicted to, or they're just coming in a bunch of cartels and they're doing this and that. Cartels exist, okay? They're part of the structure, but the biggest cartel is the DEA. The biggest cartel is the intelligence apparatus at hand, because this is how they work. This is how they make money. This is how they move drugs. The war on drugs is nothing but a front for the actual drug operation itself. And so when you try to blame the whole border situation on people coming in and selling fentanyl, that's ridiculous. You know who's dying of fentanyl? A bunch of celebrities. Rich Hollywood celebrities are dying of fentanyl poisoning. They're dying, all kinds of people, from the working class poor to the rich. This is an American issue, a U.S. problem. It is an epidemic. This is nothing to do really with the amount of some sort of crime and people coming in. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is, before Biden, there was Obama, and before Obama, there was Bush. The border policy has been largely the same from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden. Very little has changed. There has been some virtue signaling, right, of the liberals trying to get some of the Latin community to vote for them, trying to get the Latinos for Biden or whatever the hell that was, all of that, saying they were going to be more empathetic. You had AOC doing her whole thing, at the border, her whole show. They do that, right? They say they're going to do this, they're going to do that. They don't really do anything, though. This is why they've lost so many people of Latin descent voters in the Democratic Party. You had a lot of people who are like Latinos for Trump. I say this all the time. I have family members that are Trump supporters because of just how inept the Democratic Party has been. And so that, to me, really just shows that this is far beyond like a two side of the aisle issue. When we're talking about the border situation, you cannot just say these people are coming in and invading your country without talking about the foreign policy aspect, without talking about how we got here in the first place and what we're doing to these people's countries. It seems to me that people are getting played, that they're allowing themselves to be manipulated in this gigantic psyop by the 1% of the 1%, by the elites, quote unquote, who are trying to turn them against each other. So it wasn't enough to turn, liberals against conservatives. It wasn't enough to turn and factionalize the left into several little factions, and anybody who's an independent, factionalize them as well. It's now necessary to turn people of one ethnic group against the other. This always works and has worked time and time again. This fear mongering, what I'm seeing from a lot of people, even people on the left who talk about the border crisis. Well, literally the border crisis is the least of our problems right now, because the thing that is literally exacerbating everything is our foreign policy. The United States is trying to start a war with Iran. The United States is trying to start a war with China. The United States is starting to start a war with Russia. They're already in a proxy war with Russia via Ukraine. They're in a proxy war near a war with Iran via the Palestinian issue. They want to start another with Yemen, with Israel and versus Yemen, and they want to go after China via Taiwan. So what's causing all of this. And on top of all of that, they're trying to still take and steal what doesn't belong to them. You see the Essequibo region between Guyana and Venezuela. That's another mechanism for the United States to go after Venezuela's oil. And then you see this time and time again. So this isn't really about the border. This is about using the border to focus and distract the attention of the American public that's really angry and could actually do something against our own government, to refocus and distract that direction towards some immigrants coming in, because we've fucked their country. So they have literally no choice but to go here. It's much harder to get to Europe from the Americas. Duh. That's why they don't go there. And the border issue in Europe is a whole other thing. Now, I do have to say, Pasta, there is some truth to the fact that people, corporations do, and rich people do love paying slave wages to migrants and immigrants, because they'd rather do that and cut their costs down than pay a person that's of a legal status the actual wage that they deserve. So what does that do? That actually screws things up for the regular American person and the immigrant that's earning less than they should. And who is winning here? The 1%. So your attention should not be directed at, these people are taking all of this and they're voting. That's not happening. They're not getting freebies. We've spent so much time in California in the homeless encampments. We've been around the block. The majority of people we see are U.S. born Americans who are homeless. I rarely would see, a Latin American that is homeless. Rarely. It was a rarity. And Jonny and I went and we barely ever saw any, and this is like, in an area that's heavily Mexican, heavily, Central American. You don't see these people homeless because they usually have big families. It's a number of reasons. So this idea that people are off the system, these specific people coming in, that's also not actually a valid idea either. So there's just so much of that I think is just being manipulated. And Elon Musk is part of it. A lot of these people that are fear mongering each other about people coming in and taking what's theirs. What is yours? Who's taking stuff away from you. It's our own government. It is not your neighbor, and it's not the people south of the border either.
Yeah. I would like to kind of talk a little bit more about the fentanyl crisis real quick too as well. Jeff Over Turf, who's in the chat right there, says, fam, the fentanyl crisis is real. Okay, let's say for argument's sake that a lot of fentanyl is coming in across the border. What do you need to get rid of that fentanyl? You need customers. Who creates the customers? Now, shout out to Shanda Master out there from Roar Media and Oz and all those people and Amber. We love you guys. Those are our fams. They will always be our fams. But me and Shanda used to do a show together, and I'm sure we'll start kicking up as the new year, comes into play, and we settle on down and talked. And we talked about, a lot of the crises and a lot of the people and a lot of the Americans that are addicted to these drugs, these opioids and stuff. And most of the opioids are given to a person the first time ever they try them by their doctors, by the white coats here in the United States. If you have a lot of fentanyl coming in across the border, the thing you need to get rid of that fentanyl is customers. Who creates those customers? Well, the Sackler cartel. Somebody was saying in the chat, the Sackler cartel. It's the big farmer companies. Purdue Pharma. Thank you, Hugo. These customers are created by big pharma. Right? That's what happened. So who are we to really blame? Would fentanyl come across the border if we didn't have a fentanyl problem? No. If we didn't have addicted citizens? No, it wouldn't happen. That is the problem itself. Why are we as Americans, who are supposed to be some of the most bright, brilliant people on the face of the earth, are not looking at the causation of all these problems, the causation of migration, the causation of addiction? It starts right here at home. These are homegrown problems. And until we start looking inward and start taking accountability for ourselves, and that's the whole thing when we get into this argument, this discussion. I can't wait to have this discussion with my good friend Mel K about, we should be proud about being Americans and whatnot. And they think that we are self-hate. We don't we don't love ourselves because we're Americans. Well, look, everybody should love themselves. You can't love anybody until you learn to love yourselves. But I want to start taking accountability for our actions. And when we sometimes say America is the greatest country on the face of the earth, that manufacturers consent for us to ignore our problems and put them on somebody else and blame who? The immigrant. That's the issue here. I'm not saying that we shouldn't love ourselves. We shouldn't be proud that we're Americans, but we have to start looking at the causation of all these problems. Yes, it's our government doing it, but why wouldn't we hold our own government accountable rather than pointing at the immigrant? And that's the biggest problem right here. And that's something we need to start talking about. It is huge. And when it comes to this fentanyl situation, if you want to say, and you know damn well that the majority of the migrants are coming across are not drug dealers or runners. And it's such a small, tiny bit of most of the people who are coming across are escaping the tragedy and the chaos within their own country caused by who? Western foreign policy. And they're coming to work. That's it. They're loving, peaceful people. We know we lived in California. We worked in the restaurant business, ladies and gentlemen. These people are leaving one job to go to another and sending that money home. And these are the most peaceful people on the face of the earth, ladies and gentlemen. They don't want to start fights. They don't want to get in trouble. They want to remain in the shadows. They just want to take care of their family.
Listen, the United States is made up of immigrants. And at the end of the day, every single person that even is speaking against immigrants is an immigrant, was an immigrant at some point or another, unless you're Native American. And that's the reality people don't want to hear about either. But not even mentioning that, I mean, Pasta's absolutely right. There's this whole just leaving out, when you talk about the border crisis and you leave out the foreign policy aspect of it, you're really just not even scratching the surface. Really, you're doing absolutely a damaging service to the topic itself. And that's what I'm really sick and tired of seeing